So the next bill that the committee will entertain will be LD 1028, an act to enhance municipal home rule statutes.
Can I make a motion?
You're certainly free to make a motion if you wish to.
In the summary of the bill, it says, denies corporations constitutional rights. Motion ought not to pass.
Motion by Representative Clark, seconded by Representative Harville to report ought not to pass. Discussion on the motion.
Says that Shapley is the town that wanted to do this, found a way to do it, put it in front of their voters, and they enacted it. So what do we need to do to, do we need to do something to give this authority? No matter what, if someone wants to challenge it, they will, whether we act on it or not. The argument the proponents made was the courts created this nightmare, but it sounded like we want to give it back to the courts so they can fix it. It's probably not a good bet. I don't support it because I don't understand that it's necessary. It sounds as if when people wanted it, or in that community that they did, they were able to do what they wanted to do. It may not have been as easy as they wanted it to be, but that's okay. Everything isn't easy, but they did it. So I don't understand the need, I guess.
I have a political question.
Okay.
I can't answer political questions.
And the chair would request the sponsor to step forward and see if he could answer that question.
Rather than have individual towns make such decisions, that if the state established a policy of sorts, then that whole element would be bypassed. In other words, it would maintain some consistency for everybody. Everybody would be on the same page, essentially. I think that's what the idea of the intent of the bill actually was.
And again, as my 15 years, I always relate back to as a selectman, that I think in some insidious way, the idea of home rule gets undermined just slowly but surely. And then bills like this often tend to be mistaken, even though, I'm sure that incidents like having the water being commodified kind of stimulate the interest. But that's not, I don't think that's what it's really about. I think it's really looking at the rights of individuals who live in a community and pay taxes, and how that relates to entities that come in, and I think sometimes or maybe most of the time for good purposes, to enrich the community. And I think the point is that the wishes of the individuals who live there should be given precedent over and not be seen as equal to the rights of people coming in to, in some way, take advantage, and I don't mean that in a bad way, take advantage of the environment there.
And we're here to represent people. So I don't really see the big corporations as people. I'd like to have that redefined someplace along the way, and this is a step. I don't think it's particularly about Poland Spring. It's about how far control has been removed from the average citizen, so that when we listen to this expert come up from Washington, who was an expert in international trade, he said if a problem, and just using for the time being Poland Spring as an example, if a problem came up in the community, the issue would not be adjudicated in state courts or even federal courts. It would go to an international court. That's how far the rights of the average citizens have been removed from any control. And when I asked in this case about Nestle if they would be willing even to submit to Maine courts if a dispute came up. Things can look wonderful now. They can change. There's no willingness to discuss that. There's an enormous amount of power that these people have recognized and trying to recapture some ownership in their communities.
But I just, before I vote, wanted to let the committee know my thinking. I will be supporting the pending motion. I enjoyed serving with Representative Cassavant, and I appreciate that you brought this bill forward, but there's several reasons why I can't support it. The first one being relatively obvious: it's unconstitutional. I think if we're going to engage in an effort to change the Constitution, one should do that with the federal government, and I don't see this as a proper vehicle. Second of all, I serve on the Natural Resources Committee, and we have the Natural Resources Protection Act to protect the over extraction of groundwater. The largest users of water in the country and are agriculture, industry, and energy, not Nestle. And these bills targeted at one company providing people with easy access to something that's actually good for their health for a change, I don't really comprehend. They give jobs to Maine people, and I can't support the pending motion. I am supporting the pending motion. I cannot support this bill.
In our community in Sanford, with a 11 plus unemployment rate, and you've got a company that wants to move in and bring some jobs, let me tell you something. We better start taking a different attitude towards them. And we better start, especially if they're good, clean jobs, because the messages that we send from this body go across the state and they go across the country. And we have an opportunity to have good, clean jobs, and they can pump water for years and years, and they're not going to run out down there. And I think we really need to reevaluate what our priorities are in this state. And I don't mean that as any disrespect to anybody, but I think that 11% unemployment, and that's before the impact of R. Donnelly. And there's people just clamoring and begging for jobs, and we owe them more than what we're doing for them.
I brought up the slaughterhouse cases because in 1873, New Orleans had a cholera epidemic. And that's where the first discussion of the 14th Amendment in terms of corporations and people came about. It was later brought up within Pacific Railroad because ultimately the courts ruled in the slaughterhouse cases that that there was a compelling interest of New Orleans to deny the 5 slaughterhouses because of the cholera epidemic the right to shut down. But within that decision, the argument that was made, which was that corporations are fundamentally made up of people. Therefore, when you deny a corporation due process, by definition, you are denying people the right to work. You are denying the people the right to due process. That is what was carried over in Pacific, and good luck overturning it with the Supreme Court.
Reminded that I have a Superfund site in my district that's created by a mine that was a great idea at the time to come in and mine, and in the process because it was going to provide a lot of jobs, and it did. It provided for half a dozen years a lot of jobs, and right now we're looking at possibly spending $10 to $20 million of your taxpayer money, our taxpayer money, to fix that up. And at the time that the state licensed it and thought that this would be a good thing to do, that it wouldn't have any adverse impact. And this may be ultimately true of any kind of extraction industry that comes in, whether they're extracting water or zinc. But I think I'm not as comforted with the DEP's oversight. I think they certainly have knowledge, but they don't have a monopoly on the ultimate knowledge as to what can work and not work and what ultimately will deplete a resource. And that was clear in listening to their testimony. They do have experts, and they make you believe they have that competency. But the state also probably made those same claims back when the Callahan mine was opened back in the 70s. So I'm not as comforted by some thinking that this is the direction to go and we should sell our soul for the 50 pieces of, or the 700 jobs, so to speak, that are being offered forward. It's certainly attractive at this time in our existence, but I still feel strongly that we need to pursue the ought to pass side of this, and regardless of whether it appears to be an upriver swim on the Constitution part, if you don't swim in that river, nothing's going to happen. So I still insist that this is something we need to argue on the floor, and I guess we will, because we'll have a divided report, and thank you.
It's not fair to say that anyone in this legislature does not want to have good, clean, reliable jobs for their people. They, as Representative Schatz said, we just don't want to sell them short. we'll buy you a few jobs today so we can have the international courts run you tomorrow. It's obviously, I've made efforts to talk with at least Poland Spring, Nestle, to ask about some rapprochement, and there just isn't anything there. So, it's really irresponsible to say that any of our legislators don't want good jobs. I really oppose that thinking, or that this is just about Poland Spring.
Motion on the floor is ought not to pass. All those in favor of the pending motion? Opposed? And we would assume ought to pass.
The amendment that was proposed in the testimony, so ought to pass as amended.